Paper Girls, Encanto, and Brian Boru, High King of Ireland. This is Staying In.
Can we please talk about the secret life of Peter Willington?
I feel like if we do, it's less of a secret.
Yeah.
By definition, by talking about it, it ceases to be the secret life of Peter Willington. And he would lose all of his carefully cultivated mystique.
I'm pretty sure the secret life will continue. You're right, Dan. It could be one of those things where the more I bring it to the surface, the more he burrows down and becomes exceptionally more secretive. And
Is it like the secret life of pets?
A little bit, yeah.
When you shut the door, he shuts up rather than starts talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the opposite of the toys in Toy Story.
Yeah, absolutely. When I get left at home by myself, I'm just rummaging through the bin.
Or lies perfectly still. Until someone, he's pretty much the Schrodinger's cat of this podcast. Like, if no one's looking at Peter Willington, he just stands still and doesn't do anything until he's observable.
He both exists and does not exist at the same time. We could talk about my secret life. What would you like to know? I'll see whether or not I can reveal all, like Mystic Meg and the lottery numbers.
There's two things I want to address. One of them more pertinent and one of them more pertinent than the other, and the other one I really want to dig down inside of. So Chris came round my house the other day and we played. Did we play Ginger? Was that when we played Ginger by WizKids?
Yeah, we played Ginger and we played DC Villains video game.
Oh yeah, DC Lego Villains, which is a pretty. I mean, it gets good reviews, but me and Chris were spent most of the time not really understanding what on earth is going on. Like there was.
Yeah, I mean, famously, that is a game made for 9-year-olds.
I know. That's what I mean. And we were like, we have no. There must be so much like assumed knowledge for how these games operate because we just like we have no idea what we're doing. It was good fun though. We played it for a couple of hours and then I deleted it. But then. As I want to do, I thought, while Chris was there, let's browse around other people's profiles of people that I know on online and judge them based on the time they spent playing games.
So is this on the PlayStation?
So this is on PlayStation. So now on the PS5, you can now see the hours that you've been playing games for, which apparently it's been doing since the PS4, but only now they're kind of giving you access to that kind of information. I mean, a pretty standard thing across most things, including the Switch, and for whatever reason, only now is the PlayStation powerful enough to show you the time that you spend playing games. So we were scouring through, and then it was the first big shock was, oh, Dan spent 50 plus hours playing Deathloop.
Yeah.
And I was like, my God.
Do you know what he said, Dan? He said, he said, I bet it was just, he just left it paused because, other stuff happened. That's what he assumed.
You are wont to just leave a game running and then just come back to it a few hours or days later. But no.
Rest mode doesn't keep the time going, though.
How do you know?
Because it doesn't.
All right.
I think he's right.
I mean, I could try and go into detail, but we may be here a while. But
that was the confidence of a man who said, actually, if it did log those hours, they would be significantly greater than what is on the screen.
And then I was scrolling through, and I was like, Pete's playing Resident Evil 6. And I was like, he's never spoken of this before. And then Chris went, oh yeah, he does that with his mate Danny. And then like a scorned lover, I was like, hang on, who is this?
Who's Danny?
I've never heard of this Danny before.
Excuse me.
Yep.
I am not the only Dan in your life. Is that what you're revealing to me right now?
You are the only Dan. You are the only Dan in my life. He is the only Danny in my life.
I mean, that's a tiny, tiny caveat. That helps you sleep at night.
Pete can have a friend called Samuel and another friend called Chris, spelt differently, and then that's fine.
Well, I mean, you know the story. I did have to change the spelling of my name because Pete already had a friend spelled that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So otherwise, it's too difficult to kind of keep track of. It's one in, one out, basically.
Honestly, Pete. He was talking as if he'd just found out there was a fifth member of the podcast team that he wasn't aware of.
That's really sweet. That's really sweet, Sam. So what else do you want to know about my PlayStation collection? Is there anything else in there that you were...
There is, and this is the most pertinent point, because I feel like whereas it's not out of the realms of possibility that I can see you playing Resident Evil 6 with another man, it is completely out of the realms of possibility that the Peter Willington that I know or love, that I've known for over a decade, would spend 9 hours of their precious time playing the PlayStation title Pure Pool.
Pure Pool. and of course, its expansion, Super Snooker or whatever it was that's included with that.
Yeah, because how can you get even more pure than Pure Pool?
Absolutely.
9 hours playing a pool game and on the PlayStation.
Yes. To be clear, it's a pool game, not a game of pool. I didn't spend 9 hours pushing the same balls around on the base, right?
Just with the chalk.
Yeah, yeah. Make sure it's really chalked. So it's we talk about it sometimes. For me, it's a podcast game. It's I spend there is weirdly there's sort of a story mode, sort of, and I'll be honest, it's quite lightweight.
Is it from the balls' perspective?
I was going to say, is it Reds versus Yellows?
Yeah. Smash cut. The black is on the way to the pocket. How did I get here? Well, I'll tell you.
So Sam, how's the swanky new tablet?
The swanky new tablet.
It is swanky.
It's really good. It's really good.
It's a big boy.
It is quite a big 12 inches. It is. It's a lovely big 12-inch Samsung
foot-long
tablet. So it's a delight to have. So obviously the first thing I did was downloaded Magic the Gathering Arena.
Good lad.
And then Pokemon, the TCG.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing that has been wonderful to do on the tablet has actually been to read comics, which is something that I've been really wanting to get back into for a long time, but either because of, the pandemic business or because of the general cost and difficulty of getting comics physically, I've been wanting to sort of shift into more digital realms. So getting a nice tablet to read comics off of has been a delight, especially one that's really big, because it really helps. The images on screen, I don't really need to use the reading view. I've forgotten what it's called, but Amazon,
guided view.
Guided view, yeah. Amazon and Comixology have this guided view. Yeah, it never really gives you the full picture. I love one of the best things about comics is that whole full page experience. Yeah, so it's been great to kind of get back into them that way. And then Chris pops along and goes, "Do you know you can read loads of comics for free if you've got Prime?" And I was like, "No, I don't. Thanks very much, Chris." So all of Scott Snyder's so Scott Snyder's done a massive deal with Comixology. So all of his new books you can read for free if you've got Prime. You can only get 7 of them, I think, and then you have to bounce one back and then download
it's
another
like a
one.
library.
So it's like a library. So all of Scott Snyder's new stuff, like Clear, Night of the Ghoul, and We Are Demons.
We have demons.
We have demons. They're all free. You can just download them. Also, his first volume of American Vampires is also free on Prime. And you can just download them and read them and then send them back. And I think there's also some other Comixology originals like Jock and Jeff Lemire have
Snow Angels.
So I also read. So I have a Fire HD10, which I think is the Amazon tablet, cheap tablets, basically. And I got that basically just for reading comic books, although I played bits and pieces on it as well. And again, perfect size for comics, really large, really lovely to kind of hold. And the thing that kind of I got back into reading comic books and manga and stuff like that on that tablet as well, because suddenly, I wanted to, let's say for example, I wanted to read, let's say you wanted to read something like Saga, right, as an omnibus edition. If you buy the omnibus edition, that thing is 1.5 inches thick, right?
I've got all
per
3
volume.
Yeah.
And there's exactly right. Like they are massive, right? So they're actually slightly uncomfortable to read. Like you can't really lay back and relax because you just drop the thing on you and knock yourself out for 2 hours. But the other thing is, and this is the thing that I realised, was that we are beyond now pretty much the realm of comic books having a value beyond the material, but beyond the actual stories themselves, right? Like we're way beyond the golden age, silver age of comics where, oh, you've got a Superman #1, that's worth loads of money, or like that's got a load of prestige behind it. It's like, nah, they're just so mass market now. Most of the comics are just so mass market now that like there is no value there. But more than that, they take up a huge amount of space, and because there's then no resale value, I'm just kind of like, well, rather than spending 25-30 quid on a volume, I could spend 25-30 quid on all 3 volumes digitally in a sale.
Sure.
And the space it takes up is the centimeter, like 3/4 of a centimeter width of my tablet. Do you know what I mean? It's and it just makes it so much more convenient, and because of that, I'm reading more.
It's interesting you mentioned Saga Pete because I wanted to talk about Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan. You bought me the 2nd volume of this for my birthday, actually.
We did.
And I picked that up in a comic book shop, the 1st volume. It was actually when I was in Bristol with you, Pete.
I was there as well. Let's not forget.
Yeah. It was that summer where we went and Pete nearly fell down the stairs. And I literally judged this. I judged this comic book by its cover, this graphic novel, because the cover is just sublime. This comes from the artist Cliff Chiang, who I first became aware of with the New 52 Wonder Woman. Just gorgeous colours, really just pops, and just a joy to turn every page. And a visual treat for the eyes. And if you pair that with the wonderfully profound and magnetic writing of Brian K. Vaughan, who I know we've waxed lyrical about a lot at length on the pod previously, you get Paper Girls, which... how do you describe Paper Girls? Well, it's set in 1988 and it's 4 paper girls. And when I say paper girls, girls who deliver papers, not like,
not origami.
Erin.
Yeah, not like that thing that you do in like infant school where you'd cut out a single piece of paper and then unfold it and then you have all the little things holding hands.
But it does that thing that Saga does. It's almost an inversion of Saga, I would say, where Saga tells an incredibly universal, almost human story set amidst this bonkers backdrop. Paper Girls, you've almost got an inversion of that. It starts off with an extremely human story that becomes much, much more bonkers. But what causes you not to become completely lost and decoupled from that sense of being grounded is the human story at its centre, which is the relationship between these 4 girls. Erin, Mackenzie, KJ and Tiffany, and it's the night after Halloween in Cleveland, Ohio, and basically while they're delivering their papers, there's an alien invasion, a temporal alien invasion. You've got this invasion from the future, and you just begin this kind of, it almost feels like a real-time roller coaster ride of them trying to understand and then fix what this problem is. And it's got those kind of Brian K. Vaughan things of characters being confronted with seemingly impossible, unpredictable situations. So every time you turn the page, you go, I don't know where this is going. What? Now you've introduced this. That for some writers, if I'd read that, I'd be really thinking, okay, now they're just being silly. But the way that Vaughan writes, that I really, really love, is that you're just as clueless as the characters are. It's not like the characters just kind of get it and move on. You're like, well, hang on, I need footnotes here. If anything, you're just a couple of moments ahead of the characters. It's a really interesting sensation of being. Ironically, given this, a lot of the ideas this story grapples with is around time and what we do with that time, and whether actually we should focus on progression through the future, or if we could go back in time and change things for the better, should we do that? It's a really, really interesting narrative that has, it's completed its run. I believe it started in 2016, and I think it went on for about 3 years, and I think there's like 6 volumes in total, I think. And I've just got the first 2. I've got the first 2, but that's going to be something I'm just going to look forward to getting from myself every so often as a little treat. But just a stunning book, really.
Yeah, it is.
I lent Sam the first volume of this, and I know you're a big K. Vaughan fan, as is, well, I think everyone in this room actually is a Brian K. Vaughan fan.
I don't think I've ever read. I don't think I've ever read anything by Vaughan.
Oh, really?
You've never read Y the Last Man?
Nope.
You've got Saga on your bookcase. You've never been curious.
That's Alex's. Yeah. No.
I know, but you've not been curious to read it.
It's not my copy.
You don't touch each other's books.
It's not my copy, so I will not be touching. No, it just I just never got around to it. I've just had other bits.
Fair enough.
It looks really good. Just it's never quite grabbed me to want to kind of explore it. But I know how quality Vaughan's writing actually is, and I guess I get the feeling when you talk about this roller coaster thing, I feel like Vaughan's probably part of it is like the trust in that writer of like this will work out. They know where this is going. Like it's not a case of like and now this because like random thing. It's like you know how this is going to wrap up.
There is a part of that to Paper Girls, and which is what I found really, really interesting. And it's kind of like one of those moments of it's kind of one of those moments of self-realization. You know, when you're watching a piece of media or you're reading something or playing something or whatever, and you have one of those realizations where you're kind of surprised by it, or you come across something that's unexpected, and it gives you a bit of a moment of self-evaluation. Well, it does for me anyway, where it's just like, how come that surprised me? How did he actually pull off that trick? Like there's a moment at the end of Paper Girls Volume 1 which is so obvious it's going to happen. Like it's so telegraphed. Like you can spot it a mile off. But I could not wait to get to it. I could not wait to see this play out how I already knew it was going to play out. Now usually I'd roll my eyes and go, oh, yeah, it was obvious. Yeah, I saw that coming. Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. But the writing and the art style is so compelling, and the characters. It must be because of the characters. The characters are so believable, and the world around them, despite, as Chris was saying, despite being this like unfurling, like universe stretching event, is so interesting that I just wanted to see those characters in that situation. So rather than being critical about the situation itself, I was, just excited about seeing how these characters would react in this very sort of like cliched, predictable ending, and that's like a real skill for, a writer and artist to pull off.
It feels like there's It feels like there is often you get two types of narrative writer. The narrative writer that revels in the twist. You never saw that coming, did you? And you're waiting for the reveal, and that's the exciting part. But actually, I think it's a harder thing, because to surprise somebody, you can just kind of go out of nowhere, right? You can just kind of turn on a dime and, oh, okay, fine, I didn't see that coming, but whatever. What's his name? M. Night Shyamalan likes to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, the chap who did Sixth Sense. That you're waiting for the reveal. Oh, and there's kind of a pleasure in that. But I think that actually a bigger challenge is to know where you start and know where you end, and enjoy the ride so much that it doesn't actually matter that you know where you're going. The journey itself is compelling. Well, can I share something else secret and private and lovely with you about my year so far?
Secret and private and lovely.
Yeah, so New Year's resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
We said what they were going to be, and I said, and I put a commitment in that I would do them. And I've
you weren't committed enough to actually turn up for that specific episode. But
I just thought I was workshopping the.
You literally phoned those
resolutions. Yeah. I have got my copper medal for Drive-Through RPG for my Catcot Collection RPG thingy-mabob.
Oh,
what,
wow.
what did you have to do to get that?
January.
What
Now, 50 sales. A total of 50 people have to part with at least $1.20. I think it is. I think there's a minimum threshold, so it can't be like can't be like 6 pence or whatever it is for.
I think I paid more than that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you didn't get in the bundle, so it got added to a bundle basically, so yeah, I've sold more than 50 copies now. Which is
Wow.
very exciting. So silver is
Congratulations.
100.
That's amazing.
But that is my New Year's resolution. That one done.
Well, surely that one should be one that kind of rolls on. So you've hit that target so early. Surely you shouldn't just end it here. It should now
That's
kind
such a
of go
dad
up to
thing
at
to
least
say, Dan.
I'm taking. Yeah, I know, right?
silver
I'm taking
or
it
gold.
as a win, Dan. I'm taking it as a win, Dan. Like, I'm happy if it gets silver. That's brilliant. So now all I've got to do is buy a house.
Which is arguably the easier of the two.
Easy.
No.
And then some third thing that I talked about, which I can't remember what it is now.
Paint all your miniatures.
No.
Paint all my miniatures.
One was get fit, Pete.
Oh, I need to get fit. Yeah. that's
Yeah,
it.
get fit. Well, you got your mate Danny now to help you out with that, haven't you? So-
Yeah.
Bloody hell! This is. I'm not.
Danny
gonna
can
live
do
this
everything.
Down, am I? Do you want me to send you some nice roses and a box of chocolates? Yeah. And also, fun thing, and I haven't told you folks this. They're going to do a print version.
What?
I thought you were going to say,
Yeah.
I genuinely, as you started saying the sentence, like, they're turning it into a film.
It's been optioned by
it's been optioned.
Spielberg.
Yeah. It's
Apple TV have bought it.
There's going to be a physical print run. It'll be print on demand on Drive-Through RPG, so you'll be able to buy a physical copy of it at some point. Which
That's
is
fantastic.
absolutely
Again, aren't I?
bonkers.
Danny's writing a foreword, isn't he, to the new edition?
Yeah, that's right, Danny is. Yeah. I renamed the character to Danny. Danny, I love you. The game is on. So I have done a New Year's resolution, and I'm looking at everybody else's and thinking, come on.
Yeah, but mine's ongoing through. Mine was mine got cut off the podcast for two reasons. Well, just one reason was that we never talked about it. So
Yeah.
it was
Wasn't that
never
it was
mentioned.
there, and I just thought I just didn't think it was interesting enough to make the edit. We didn't actually speak about it.
Well, mine's ongoing month by month. So it's listen to an album and an album of an artist that I've never heard before every month. So I've already done January's one. I listened to Dave, We're All Alone in This Together, which is a really good grime album.
Very nice.
Dave, you might be familiar with. He performed on the Brits last year. So I'm already 1/12 or a sixth of the way to completing that particular
Well done.
task.
Well done.
And the other one was I'm finally going to at least prototype the board game that I've been wanting to make for ages. That's never quite got out of the Google Notes stage. So
You got 11 months left, haven't you?
now I've got 11 months left to do that, to start it. At least. I read my first M.R. James short story the other day.
Which one?
So I got the collected editions for Christmas, which some might say is an unusual gift to open in front of your family at Christmas, but Christmas is the perfect time for ghost stories, so I thought it was very apt.
So which of the short stories did you read?
So I immediately text you and Chris, knowing that you are fans of Mr. James,
Love it.
to see where should I start, because I could either start story one and go through them, but I thought let's have a bit of let's sort of have a bit of a connoisseur's choice of where to start with these stories. So you sent me a load through, and the one that sounded the most appealing was whistle and I'll
my
be
lad.
there.
Whistle and I'll come to you, my lad.
Okay, whistle and I'll come to you, my lad.
It's clearly made an impression on you.
Well, it's quite
Whistle
a
and I'll
verbose
be
title.
there.
Now, Chris, just so I'm remembering, because it was about a year ago I listened to it. This is the one with the sheet, is that right?
It is the one with the sheet.
That's all we need to know about the sheet. Cool. one of the criticisms I've heard of M.R. James's stuff is that they're unsatisfying, because the conclusion, and I think it's a silly reading of it, but there's rarely a significant payoff or conclusion in that same way.
And they vanquish the beast.
Yeah, exactly. There's no, we vanquish the beast. There's no, and we jump from an exploding car. There is no mad, satisfying payoff in that same way. Most of I always like to think of M.R. James stories as kind of just the camera kind of panning out from the scene, and so much of it is just left unsaid. There's little hints throughout a bunch of different stories of his of like, okay, maybe it's something to do with this, maybe it's, and quite often there's the idea of, oh, maybe they, maybe there's a really fantastic story with I can't remember the name of this story. Chris will probably know. Essentially, there's a picture of a person or a creature.
It's the mezzotint.
That's it, the mezzotint, and it isn't explained how that works, how the thing with the picture works, but you know that the picture is something to do with it. And I don't want to go into it too much because it is genuinely unsettling, but there is no great like, and that's how it was solved. And this is the same thing with a very similar idea here, but kind of a slightly different tact is essentially the works of Lovecraft, in that his idea was that you actually could understand more about the universe, but the more, one of the famous phrases that he has is one of the great reliefs in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate the contents of the universe. The idea basically being that the more we find out, the more we realize how terrifying and tiny we are, right? Like that's kind of like the opposite way of what M.R. James's kind of resolves into. And funnily enough, I have been playing an RPG, but it's not.
I mean, that's not funnily enough. No.
Smoothest and bumpiest segue.
Thanks very much.
I like the fact that it was actually quite an organic segue until the point where Pete had to introduce it, and then it got really bumpy really fast.
It's good, isn't it?
Sam had elegantly weaved it into the conversation so you could pick up the baton and no one would have noticed. And you went, funny you should say that.
I've been playing a tabletop RPG, and it's not the one that Lovecraft was vaguely sort of connected with. So this is called Casting the Runes, and it is a cult investigation in the world of M.R. James. And I was given this by a friend of mine, Tom, and I have other friends as well, just to be clear. Yeah. So this is based on a system called Gumshoe. So Gumshoe is a system that is entirely built around investigations.
Okay.
So Gumshoe asks the question, if you're going to make a game about investigation, is it actually fun for an investigator to not be able to find a clue? So one of the criticisms of certain tabletop role-playing games from the late 1970s that will go unnamed that I've been writing about, one of the criticisms of that is you can always fail to find a clue, right? Let's say, for example, you're playing in a 1990s campaign or something like that, and you've got forensics, and you're an expert forensics person. You have 100 out of 100 points in your forensics skill. If you roll a D100 and you end up on 100 points, you get that 100. That is essentially rolling snake eyes. You will always fail, and that fail could be on taking a very obvious fingerprint. Now, you as a forensics expert would never make that mistake, right? But that system allows you to make those mistakes if you're playing it rules as written rather than rules as intended. I do think there's a bit of a difference there. The other side of it is that when you're doing an investigation-based game, and we've all run RPGs before where we've had moments where you've had to kind of uncover a bit of a mystery, right, to some degree. If you have a single point of failure in any adventure, i.e. the players have got to find this key. They have to find it because behind the locked door is the MacGuffin, right? if they don't find that key, you can't move the story on, right? And investigation games always have these opportunities for there to be failure. So if you end up with a story that there is this, you have to get this one piece of information and you don't, then your game basically stalls and you have a bunch of players who don't have any agency, don't know how to move on, and the GM just gets really frustrated. The idea with Gumshoe is that I'm looking at the stat sheet now. The idea with Gumshoe is basically, as long as you have a single point of skill in a specific thing, so for example, folklore or charm or evidence collection, if you have at least 1 point, you can put more than 1 point in, you will always get the evidence. You will always get the information. There is no roll. There's nothing like that. So if, let's say, for example, I needed to get that fingerprint. Let's say, I can see there's some dust. I can see there's some fingerprints. And I have 1 point in evidence collection. The GM would not require a roll for it. You would just say, you take the fingerprint, and that fingerprint comes out just fine. Now, if you have 2 or 3 points in it, you can spend some of that to say, and not only do you get it out of that, on your PDA that you put the scan into immediately, that fingerprint is in the database. It's Barry Grigsby, and he lives here, right?
Just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah, no.
So if you're more than an expert, essentially, what you're paying for is more information. You could put all of that stuff together. You could go back to the precinct and you could find out, you could run the numbers yourself and all that kind of thing and figure out who it is yourself. But the more spend, the more information you get. And that can apply to a whole bunch of different things in basically the same vein. You do still have things like health and I think it's called stability, which is basically sanity.
So are you rolling dice for anything, or is it literally just points based and decision based?
So there are certain things that you will roll dice for. So when you get into things like combat, Gumshoe is like, okay, well, you will have to roll dice around those things because there's an element of chance. Basically, what Gumshoe is trying to do is remove the element of chance from things that actually you would probably know about or be able to do. Now, that's the Gumshoe system. Casting the Runes puts that into the world of M.R. James. And it's largely successful, I would say. I would say it's pretty good. It's a good system for it because, as you'll find with all of your stories that you end up reading, it really is about antiquarians going and finding a weird thing and investigating. It's mostly about that. It isn't really about fist fighting, right? Whereas a lot of RPGs do come down to, we're going to have a fight. Really, this is about...
Come here, you lad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on.
It's very unlikely that you'd end up with an Edwardian, antiquarian sort of like having to get into a fist fight. But you can.
With a duvet.
With a duvet, yeah. But there are rules to cover those situations, and also rules to cover situations in which maybe there's some other form of peril, like leaping a chasm or that kind of thing, physical activities along those lines. But again, you'll never miss a piece of information, and that's really, really good. Like all of the Gumshoe system works really, really well, and indeed, the world of M.R. James, there isn't a true mythos in that same way, but that kind of tone, those kinds of stories can absolutely be told with this system, and it works really well. The book itself is really, really good in that way. Here's the core issue, folks. There's no payoff. So you get to the end of a one-shot adventure, and you've had a lovely time, and you've done really great role-playing, and the adventure's brilliant, and you found out some stuff about the mystery, but you'll never solve what the mystery actually is. You might find out a little bit about it, but the payoff, there's no like... So the one shot that I did, for example, the ending of the game was basically, so we buried them. Like it was basically like we found some bones, and then basically we gave them a proper burial. That was the ending. That was the payoff, right? Like and like that was the conclusion, and we definitely all came away from it with a feeling of like, ooh, like everything that ran up to that was like, oh, this is really unsettling, and like what a horrible turn of events, and like what a horrible environment to be around, and lots of creepy moments of like characters that may not be there, and doppelgangers, and lots of really good unsettling stuff that I really like in horror, which is why I like this. But the slight issue is that for a lot of people who are looking for role-playing games, what they want is power fantasy. And this is like the absolute antithesis of that, because it basically just ends with, well, you all got away and you found out some stuff, and good that they got their funeral rights. Like
what's stopping you as a DM or whatever, just, you know,
putting that in,
putting that, yeah,
because
putting that sort of cherry on top of the cake, so
because I think at that point you aren't telling an M.R. James story. It would be like telling a Terry Pratchett Discworld novel, but taking out all the humour. Like, it just doesn't... There is something about those M.R. James stories that have that kind of... that ending that leaves you sometimes slightly confused, but certainly in a situation where, well, what was that all about? And that's part of the unknown is part of the fear. And I think if you were to end it with, you know, a motorcycle gun battle, on the way out of, you know, firing electroplasm at ghosts through a graveyard, you know, like it at that point you're not playing an M.R. James story.
Don't cross the streams.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Don't cross the streams. But so there are other gumshoe systems that do that stuff, that do have a little bit more action to them. So there's one about like it's basically like what's that one with Mulder and Scully in it?
X-Files.
The X-Files. It's like the X-Files meets I don't know. Like it's basically X-Files meets vampires. With the gumshoe system, and you're kind of like investigating that stuff, and so that does get a bit more action packed. But again, that's kind of I don't actually think that there is an appropriate system for an M.R. James story, or a system that, or in the very least, I don't think that there's a system that would give you that kind of emotional impact that you might want from a campaign or from a thing, if that's what you're going in for it. If your players know, yeah, you're not going to get some massive fight with a red dragon that's sat on top of a load of gold at the end. If they're fine with that, then I think that it's a really, really good book. But yeah, it's I think you all kind of have to know what you're getting as you go in.
I watched Encanto at the weekend.
Did you? I watched it today.
I have to say, I have basically done nothing but watch or engage with Encanto for about a month.
Why?
Well, my four and a half year old boy doesn't watch films. I've tried to get him to watch films. I grew up on Disney films. I've been trying to get him to watch Disney films since he was born, and he has rejected it at every opportunity. However, Encanto has captured him. So for about a month, it's either we've been watching the film. If the film's not on, he's been watching YouTube clips. If they're not on, he's listening to it on Spotify. And if that's not on, he's walking around the house singing the songs to himself. It has been non-stop. And I love it.
That's
because
great.
he has, for the first time, watched a film the entire way through without kind of being like, after like 40 minutes, I want to watch something else. I'm like, no.
40 minutes? I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like he'll watch his programs like that, like 20 minutes at a time, and they're fine. And then I've pushed it to about 40 minutes before he's got tired. But with Encanto, he goes all the way through. I mean,
so what is it about this film, Dan, that has struck a chord
captured his
with your child?
I mean, it has to be the music. I mean, he hasn't kind of watched the films like that, but we did start listening to the music, and like he's started to become a bit more engaged with music more recently. He likes to kind of sing and he'll dance, stuff like that. He started listening to some of the music from Mary Poppins Returns. Like he loved the Triple Light Fantastic song, and I think with Encanto, there's music throughout. There's no kind of longer periods where there's not kind of a song or something like that. They do come quite quick, and they do kind of keep up that speed. the visuals of it are very vibrant and beautiful.
Very, yeah.
I mean, to Pete to explain to you, it's a film set in Colombia about a family who, through some vague Disney magic, have been given gifts and has created this, what is they refer to as their Encanto, which is kind of, I think, Spanish for kind of charm or enchantment, where their village is kind of hidden within the mountains. And it creates this life for them, and the family have these gifts which they use to serve the village, to support the village, and each of them have different gifts, whether it's they can control the weather, or they can heal people, or super strong, or all different things like that, or kind of they can hear from miles away, and they all use these gifts for helping people. So every member of the family has one of these gifts except one, who's kind of the lead, Mirabel, who's the lead person. She was the first member of the family who didn't get a gift, and so there is a fear that the magic that has created their home, and they refer to it as their miracle, may be dying. And over the course of the story, you kind of involve that more. What does it feel like to be an outsider in a group? And it's very much looking at that, and is she part of the family, and where is her place in the family? And I'd say the visuals of it are just absolutely stunning. The animation is some of the best animation I think I've ever seen, both in terms of that visual spectacle of like the surroundings of nature, but for me, just the movement. Like, so much of the film involves dance and dance numbers, and I was shocked. So I did look at it because it looked to me like it had to be motion capture because it was so fluid, some of the dance moves. But it's not. What they did was they had dancers choreograph a dance and then give footage of the dance to the animators, who then just had to look at it and say, okay, we need to replicate this. They record like a dance number twice, once with kind of the long flowing kind of skirts and once without them, so the animators can see how the fabric moves as well as the kind of all that stuff. And that was a huge takeaway for me, that it just looks so beautiful. And then you factor in the music, and it may come as no surprise to you that when the music is written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton and has written Moana, who appeared in Mary Poppins Returns, who directed Tick Tick Boom Boom, someone who I am a unbelievably huge fan of. I just fell in love with the music, and my little boy also has fallen in love with the music. And he has, as I say, he will just sing. I drive him to nursery every morning. It's about 5 minutes away. And I can just hear him, just in the back of the car, just muttering to himself an entire song. And if I try to join in, it's the wrong time. He stops me and says, no, that's wrong. That's not the right bit. We're at a different part of the song. And I just kind of have to let him sing it. But it's just what's brilliant about the music, and it's the same as I had the same feeling with Hamilton and with different things, that when I first heard the songs, I liked them, they were catchy, but I didn't kind of get under the skin of them. The more you listen to them, there is so much story baked into the words that you get so much out of it, that the more you listen to it, the more you hear it. And a lot of it, some of it is very, very fast, so you do have to tune your ear to be able to pick it all up. But once you do that, you hear everything, and what he's able to put through that music is just absolutely wonderful. When I first saw it, it was good. It wasn't kind of one of my favorites, but the more I listen to it, it really has kind of captured me, and it does lovely things with its story. It subverts a lot of what you'd expect with a Disney film. Like, I realized, like, there is a quintessential Disney storyline of person has a problem, person goes on a long journey to discover something, and then comes back to save the day. You look at Moana, you look at Lion King, you look at Little Mermaid, all these things, they have the same basis of the story, but it subverts that in a really interesting way and does things like there's no villain. There's just, I mean, that's not spoiled, there's no villain, and like, that's weird when you actually think about it. I'm like, there is, like, every other Disney film, you have that kind of proper antagonist, and it just doesn't have that.
Are there antagonists at all?
Yeah, there are. Well, there are like false heroes, I should say. And as Dan alludes to, it's quite. It kind of, to some degree, it challenges that notion of a binary. It highlights, there are villainesque people, but they're not completely fully vilified. And it highlights, and I think what's quite progressive about it is it highlights actually that, painting people as either heroes or villains is very simplistic, that binary, and it's really quite refreshing to see that. And I must admit that this film did really challenge my expectations. And many times I'm thinking, oh gosh, right, okay, I can see you're the typical princess here. I can see where this is going. Oh, you're about to get married. Great. And then it would do things that would just make me go, okay, right, cool. We're getting somewhere. That's interesting. That's quite interesting. And I think I'm going to enjoy it more a second time round, actually. Because one thing that really did surprise me was actually I got to the end of it and I was nearly moved to tears. And
really?
Yeah, that's a weird one for me. I don't know what it was. I have had a cold over the last few days that's really made me a bit vulnerable.
Probably just a bit of a blockage.
Yeah. A bit of a blockage. Exactly, Sam. Yes, although I have been experimenting with a sinus rinse. Have you ever had a sinus rinse?
You told me this the other day, I asked you how you were. And
Game
yeah, we're all right.
Changer.
Peter,
sinus rinse. I'm surprised, Pete, you've never done. I'm surprised you're not the face of sinus rinse.
Well, that feels like a backhanded compliment, if anything.
It is. There are some really touching moments in this, and one of the best compliments I can pay is one thing that always usually infuriates me in films is when characters will just suddenly break into song. Even when I know I'm watching a musical, it really just still jars with me, and it didn't so much in this. And I think that for me is testament in terms of going back to what Dan was saying about how the music and the songs don't feel, even the genre of music, so for example, doesn't feel disconnected from the narrative. It doesn't feel like there's two parallel things occurring.
I think that's a lot to do with LMM, because obviously this is the first Disney film, I think, to have a completely Latino cast, and obviously Lini Manny is Puerto Rican, or at least has Puerto Rican heritage. Anyway, so I think that whole thread that runs through it really serves. It's not a film set in Colombia about Colombian people with music written by two portly white guys, which is usually what happens with Disney stuff. Like, say for example, something like Mulan.
Lion King.
Lion King, yeah. So I think that gives it that really affords it that sense of authenticity around the music and its place and its setting, where it feels almost like diegetic until it comes out and actually, breaks into song. I mean, yeah, I had a real good time for it. I agree with Dan that the songs don't completely worm their way in on a first listen. I think that the animation is definitely what kept me watching and interested, and also the general pace of the film. Like, I couldn't really find any point where it dragged or it lacked. So I'm not surprised that your boy makes it all the way through, Dan, because there's literally not a moment to catch your breath. Like, it's always going. It's just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and never really stops, which is also quite refreshing for a film to be literally 100 minutes in length.
Well, just to compare it with one that's very similar is Moana, where, I mean, he loves the You're Welcome song, which is the song sung by Dwayne Johnson. He started watching that, and you do have some good songs, and he sticks with them, but you do then have quite a long period without a song, and that's where he lags. So, as I say, with Encanto, it constantly picks you up and picks you up again. Just as it starts to dip down, we'll bring something else in, and sometimes it's a slightly different tone of song, which is and there's a reason for that, because it's showing perhaps the other side of a character, a side that perhaps they've hidden, so it's different to everything else, and it's all very kind of well thought out. Each kind of individual point of when it's choosing to sing the song, when it's choosing to use the music, it's using it for a particular narrative reason, as opposed to, in some cases, just here's another song. Da, 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 da.
Yeah. And at the risk of a few spoilers, I think what I liked about it the most is, as Chris said, like that kind of inversion of things that we've already kind of seen. The fact that in a film like this, made by Disney a few years ago, the central character would be going on a journey where they would have to learn to fit in. They would be outcast because they didn't get the gift. They would have been shunned. They maybe would have been like really aggressive and misbehaved and therefore outcast of the family, and it will be their journey of how they learn to fit in with their family.
Yeah.
But it's the complete opposite to that. Like, she teaches her family how, like, they shouldn't be defined by the gifts that they have, and that people aren't just cast in one particular light, or they're more than you say the stereotypical like label that you might give to them, which is like a huge sort of like broader message in terms of like families anyway, which I really like appreciate. And even in some sort of like friendship groups where you have, like, for example, like Chris, he's the brainy one, and Dan, he's the long-haired one who loves films, and there's Pete, he's the one, you know, who plays RPGs, Cthulhu. And then there's Danny, and
we don't talk about Danny.
like that happens like in families and in, you know, and in social groups, as I said. And like what I really appreciated about Encanto was just like that establishing that like you should not be defined by that which you are labeled and sort of given by your family and your friends around you. Like there's more to you than that.
We played an Osprey game the other day.
We did play an Osprey game. Yeah, so we played Brian Boru, High King of Ireland. And there is a little unboxing on the Insta Chan if you want to have a look. I mean, you should just go there now just to see our best unboxing video ever. Critics agree. But you can see me unpacking Brian on our Instagram channel as well, if you really want to. But this is a game from Sylvester with incredible art by Deirdre DeBarrow.
So is this Sylvester of that really good one about the English Civil War? Not the English Civil War.
The King is Dead.
The King is Dead.
Yes, and also the Lost Expedition, which is a game that I've always wanted to play but never really got around to playing. But yeah, the King is Dead, and the King is Dead second edition was a bit of a darling last year, I think. This is a little bit different. I think it shares a little bit with the King is Dead, which, you know, as you said, was kind of focused on sort of civil war amongst Britain, but where this is concerned with control and dominance over Ireland specifically. And so there are elements in this game which are sort of area controlled, so who owns the most sort of like locations in specific regions in Ireland get points, and you know who can fend off Viking attacks and do all that kind of stuff. But there's also elements of this game where you have to sort of court the church, and you also have to literally court and get married in order to get some sort of benefits. And on top of that, this whole game is framed with the mechanic of trick taking. So there's a wonderfully interesting thing, I think, going on with Brian Boru in general, where there are lots of recognizable elements from lots of different genres of game, where it's, you know, the area control or the, you know, the war sort of aspects of some, you know, probably more serious and po-faced war games. Then there's the kind of the civil sort of diplomacy of, you know, pleasing the church and marrying the right person and into the right family, on top of a very traditional card mechanic such as trick taking, which is something that I've not seen applied to this kind of genre before. In terms of, you know, would you classify as a war game, Chris? It doesn't feel like it. It definitely feels more like a game of diplomacy, and I don't mean that with capital D.
No, because there is obviously a board game called Diplomacy. No.
Yeah,
for me, what I really, really love about this game is that it scratches that itch that it feels like you're about to enter into something akin to, say, a war game. But it isn't that. And likewise, what it isn't is just kind of just analysis paralysis to board game, where you're strategizing about moving pieces like you're in the war room of some kind of castle. What I love about this game is the trick-taking element to it, which is genuinely something I was not expecting until you pointed it out to me as you were doing the teach. And that's when I realised that's why this game has become so popular. It's because of that mechanic embedded within it.
Yeah, and it probably wasn't until we actually started playing it that I started to genuinely believe that it was going to be an actual great game to play, because trick-taking games, other than The Crew and maybe Anansi, I've never really had much success of.
So what's
mainly because so trick-taking in an essence is where if you imagine you've got a normal deck of cards and someone plays the two of hearts out in front of them, that person who played the first card is doing what's called leading the trick. So the next player has to then match that suit, and all the players around the table have to match that suit, and whoever has the highest number will win the trick.
Right, okay.
And by trick, it's basically just like that round. Now, there are other things on top of that where there's, like there'll be a trump suit. So there'll be a specific suit of cards, say like the clubs, where you can play even if it's not the matching suit of the trick, but you will win if it's the highest of the trump suit. So, and because of that sort of central concept, I think what's put a lot of people off that I've introduced trick-taking to is that you have to be very on it in terms of card counting. You have to be very on it in terms of trying to guess and predict what other people have in their hand. And you have to be very on it in trying to manipulate situations to force good cards out of people's hands.
Right.
So there's almost like this triptych of very sort of high-end game mechanisms to really get the most out of what out of the possibilities of what trick-taking is. Like all of that, if you pull it off, is really, really satisfying to play against and with. But I feel like there is a huge barrier to entry, especially competitive, which is why The Crew really pulls it off, because you're kind of learning all those skills together as a team, which is why I really love playing The Crew, but talking through situations, because that's when you realise, well, if you play this, that's going to force me to play that, which is going to force them to play that, and that shows me that I know that you've got that card in your hand, so for this round I'm going to play this so you can play that. And that's really interesting. But usually in trick-taking games, you do all that in silence, competitively, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, back to Brian. So in Brian, what you're doing is you will have one player who will lead tricks for that entire round. And they take a little disc and they say, right, I am going to try and conquer this region. And this is a red region. So that means that I have to play a red card from my hand. And that's the trick for this turn. Now, everyone else around the table has a choice. They either basically enter in competition with Chris, for example, to try and put down the highest number of that colour of that region, or they will play another card from their hand of another different colour, and you're not punished for that, this in Brian Boru, in order to perform a certain action. So if they put down a blue card, they'll get some sort of benefit with the church. If they put down a yellow card, they'll get some sort of benefit moving up the marriage track, for example. And then play goes around the table until it ends, until everyone's played a card, and then basically whoever's played the highest card, as with all trick-taking games, of that colour of that region will then win the region. What's interesting about Brian Boru, and essentially why the trick-taking mechanism works so well in this instance, is that what you're doing is so overt and clear to the rest of the table. The decisions you're making are always really interesting. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you win a trick, you get to take a certain action, which is at the top of the card. And that action will give you certain things, like you may get points, you might be able to move up on certain tracks, you might get a bit of money. At the bottom of the card, there's 2 secondary actions, which you'll get to choose from if you lose the trick. And those secondary actions tend to be better than the primary action, because it's assumed, well, you've won the trick, so therefore you've got a region, so your bonus isn't as good as everyone else's. So when you're playing a card down, you can be playing it to actively lose because you want to do what is on the secondary action of the card. But the player next to you could make you win, so therefore you can't do what you wanted to do. Also, the player next to you, say you're playing a 3-player game, essentially can be in a situation where they've seen all the cards that will be played and can just pick and choose who's going to win, who's going to lose, and what they're going to do. Which, after we got into like the second and third round of this game, I was just mesmerised by, because Chris led the trick for every single turn of that round. And only when certain things occur does the person who lead the trick changes. And for one round, I was a person who was leading the tricks, who was putting the first card down. And I thought, this is going to be easy. Like, Chris has had the easy job for all the game. But no, Chris has got the hardest job, because...
As in life?
The game is... Yeah, but Chris has got the hardest job because he's got to balance in his mind what he wants to do without any knowledge of what everyone else is going to be doing. So even though you have the luxury of being able to pick and choose around the board everywhere that's going to be conquered, and you have a certain element of an advantage of, well, I really want this, so I'm going to go for it first and put down a really high card. You're at the mercy of everyone else around the table, in terms of they can then, based off your first card, really just sit back and just try and, assess exactly what they want to do, and they have the freedom to really pick and choose what they're going to. So really the advantage is never with the first player, which is kind of what I thought would be the case. So as I said, it was mesmerizing. It was just, something that I just didn't expect from a game like this, and something I didn't expect from trick taking either as well.
And what I like about this also is it's wheels within wheels. So
yes.
In addition to that element, what stops you feeling really pressured and irritated, like I often find myself at trick taking games, who I'm not a master at them by any stretch of the imagination, is that the suit of the colour, or the suit I should say, of the card you play denotes what kind of track you're kind of looking to move up on.
Yeah.
So, for example, yellow cards speak to marriage. So for quite a while, me, you, Sam, and our friend Matt were competing for the affections of Connell, for example, who sat staring into the fire.
Oh, lovely Colm. Oh,
and even in that little mini game, there's a little bit of an interesting game going on there, isn't there? And that's just with the marriage. Or you can kind of think, actually, I'm going to try and, I can see some Vikings on the horizon. I'm going to kind of chip away at their forces there, for example. So you always kind of win. You're always getting something. Nobody ever really loses in Brian Boru. So it's a really interesting sensation when you get to the end. You don't lose. It's just you weren't as much as a winner as the other person around the table.
And there are elements, with that really, again, it's the game really works exceptionally hard to make sure that everyone feels like they have a stake in the game. So if you get to the top of the marriage track, or you've got the most religious points and you're like really up there with the priests or whatever, everything you've put into that basically gets returned to you, and you go back to zero on that track, or you lose all the influence you had in that particular arena. Everyone else gets to stay where they were, maybe with a small punishment or a small loss somewhere here or there. So it means on the next round, they've suddenly got a massive advantage in terms of, they may not have captured a lot of regions in the previous round, but they're already ahead of you on these really important tracks that can do things like help determine first player and help determine certain advantages when it comes to the later game. And one thing that we did forget to mention, which is another genre of game that this game sort of incredibly managed to like shoehorn into, but it doesn't feel cheap, is card drafting. So the whole game starts with card drafting, which when it comes to trick taking is incredibly, dangerous. It's playing with fire essentially, because you know what cards you're passing on to the player next to you. You know how powerful or how weak, or in certain cases, you can almost sort of guess what tracks they are going to be trying to go down.
Yeah. There was one round where I didn't see a single blue card.
Rounds. Exactly, yeah, because me and Matt were basically funneling all the... We were like, right, we really need to get up on this like religion track to steal first player from Chris. So we basically just sucked up all the blue cards, stopping Chris from doing it. And I guess this all comes back to like those frustrations around trick taking, and where it comes from, having to rely on card counting. But because you're card drafting, you at least know where certain cards have been distributed around the table, so you can kind of start to plot, where certain places players are going to be going and where they're going to be focusing their energies. It's wheels within wheels. It's utterly mesmerizing. I really can't wait. Hopefully you'll be able to hang out with us, Chris, when Pete comes up, because I'd really love to introduce Pete to this, because I think it does an exceptional job of basically keeping lots and lots of wheels up in the air in terms of board game mechanics, but in terms of also like generally just making sure it all feels cohesive and wonderful to play.
That was another episode of Staying In with Sam Turner, Peter Willington, Dan Frost, and myself, Chris Darby. I just want to begin by apologising for the quality of my recording there. I promise that in the next episode I will not be recording in a submarine or wherever it was it seemed to be that I was recording from. That was quite a bumper episode. We covered quite a lot of ground there, really. And if you're struggling to keep track of everything we spoke about, Peter has very kindly put in little time codes in the podcast so you can kind of jump back and forth between different talking points to find the ones that you want to go back to, essentially. If you want to reach out to us at all, you can email us at stayinginpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on social media. @stayinginpod is the handle, which will allow you to contact us via Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all manner of other social media outputs. I'm feeling quite good about my New Year's resolution. I know Pete's made headway with his, as has Sam. Dan and I are quietly confident, like the tortoise and versus the hare, that we'll be able to get ours done by the end of 2022. It's still early days yet. Still got quite a long period of time left to finish our New Year's resolutions. Okay, well, that's it from me. See you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye.